good deal. Well, we'll let anyone else come as they join, and Damon, we'll jump right into it.
Yes,
If
sir.
that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's totally fine. Let's
All
get
right,
it.
so I want to welcome you all to my monthly live webinar series called Between the Pages, where I speak with book writers and give a chance to go in a little more depth on the book, because sometimes the pages can only tell you so much. So there's always a story behind the story. And so for our January session, I'm fortunate to have with me Mr. Damion Harmon. And I shared the stage with Damon back in November, a TEDx
Hmm.
stage at TEDx Malley Creek. And I was intrigued by his talk, and he left me wanting to know a little more. So give a little briefing on Damon, and then we'll go into his work and with a little Q&A. And then once we wrap up, if you have some questions, you can put it in the chat, and we'll see if we can't answer those for you. So Damon is a TEDx speaker, and he's widely known as not your average therapist. I'll just leave that there. You can read more and more about Damon as you dig into what that means for him. He's a polished author of A Loss is a Loss, transformative work that broadens the conversation around grief beyond death, incarceration, addiction, and life transitions. And through his TEDx talk, his clinical work, his public advocacy, he challenges belief that strength requires silence and requires individuals to acknowledge what they've lost, why it mattered, and how unprocessed grief continues to shape behavior. And again, in addition to all his work and speaking that Damon does, he serves as president of MAP, Project Mental Health Access and Purpose, a nonprofit organization focused on reducing mental health stigma, increasing access care, and fostering purpose and resilience in underserved communities. That's a mouthful. I could keep going because this book has quite a few accolades, and but I'm gonna leave it there and let
Okay.
uh, us jump right into it. So again, Damon just put out A Loss is a Loss, and I was telling him before you all joined that I once I picked up his book, and I have a propensity of doing this. I go cover to cover and do a deep dive on it, and so I want to know more, and so I reach out to the author, and this is my forum to do that. So Damon, I just want to ask you, when did you realize, or what made you realize this was a book that you needed to write?
Yeah, and again, Barrett, thank you for having me, man. Definitely love the platform and what you're doing here. This is awesome. Um, what made me realize that the book was needed? Just over the years, like it says in my bio, I've been in mental health. I've been a therapist in the mental health field for
Mhm.
nearly 2 decades, and as I sit with people, whether that be clients or friends or even just myself, who were struggling but didn't feel allowed to kind of like recognize and actually verbalize that struggle. And
Right.
and some people that I hadn't lost, that hadn't lost someone to death, so they kind of minimize sometimes those feelings, whether it's a loss of a job, loss of a relationship, so on and so forth. So I realized that over time that grief wasn't the problem. It was mainly having the permission to grieve those things, because oftentimes we see it as something minuscule or something that's part of life, that we have or we experience loss. So this book came from me seeing how many people were kind of like hurting quietly because their loss didn't fit what society says grief should look like, in a sense.
Okay.
So yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And welcome, Christopher Valancier, to the call. Also caller from Dallas, Texas. So we got a lot of
Okay.
Longhorns in the house. So it's a good thing. So welcome, Chris. So you mentioned grief a lot in the book. I didn't do a body count on it. But what's one of the biggest myths about grief that you wanted to challenge when you wrote this book?
One of the biggest things I definitely want to challenge our perception on what grief is, and that it not only just comes from death, is more than just an actual death or a loss in that form. That's probably the most damaging myth, that grief is often associated with only just death. But grief shows up, in many different ways, whether that's after divorce, whether that's shifts in identity, betrayal, unmet expectations, even career changes, even becoming a different version of yourself over time. So, that's a loss. When you go from being this particular person or this perception that people have of you, and then you go into shift mode or you're going through an adjustment. So I wanted to make sure that when we only kind of validate certain losses, we teach people to kind of silence themselves. So I wanted to kind of bring along some information, and some people knew about it, but and some others, didn't. So I wanted to make sure that I brought that to the forefront to kind of so we can kind of sit in that for a little bit and understand what grief and loss is.
Okay. Well, I noticed, you mentioned that there's a lot of different types of grief. It's not just death, right? When we're dealing with stuff, and as you say, there's a lot of high functioning individuals in the world that maybe they're not experiencing a loss like that. So
Yeah,
what's often misunderstood when it comes to like a high functioning person, and as it relates to grief?
yeah. Great question. Dealing with a variety of individuals in sessions and mental health, whether that's corporate or whatever the case may be, some high level achieving types of individuals, whether it be CEOs or owners of businesses, things of that sort, and even just your normal 9 to 5er, because oftentimes because productivity kind of it gets mistaken for healing sometimes. If someone shows up to work and they're just continuously pushing through
Mhm.
after experiencing some type of loss, in a sense, high functioning people are great at performing, right? So they show up, they push through, but that doesn't mean that they've even processed anything. Oftentimes, they just kind of just keep going. I kind of had experiences with that as far as just learning early on to kind of keep pushing. When you fall, when something happens in life, you just kind of keep pushing and persevering over time. But I like to give permission to people to kind of take that stance and stop and think and process those emotions. And so sometimes society, they kind of reward us for us being strong, quote unquote. And so that grief is often overlooked or dismissed or even delayed. So eventually it shows up in other places, whether that's, emotionally, physically, or relationally. So I want to make sure that people, whether you're, the 9 to 5 or the person that's working 60 to 80 hours a week or the CEO, to be able to kind of understand from the standpoint of, I have a phrase that me and a lot of my colleagues use is to check on your strong friend. And we kind of have that line through strong in a sense, and it's just check on your friend. So those people that are always often on the go, I often think about my mom when my dad passed. She just kept going. I got to do this, I got to do that, plan for a funeral, housing things and all those different things that people often do to kind of absolve themselves from feeling the emotions that's often associated with grief and loss.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. Now, in the book, you have several chapters. You kind of lay it out in some steps. You kind of take the reader through somewhat of a journey. And I
Mhm.
like the fact that you do a lot of questions at the end of each. So it really has a lot of reflection that you take the reader through. Was there a chapter that, as you wrote it, you had a revelation yourself that you could share with us?
Oh man, yeah, I have a lot of them. I think over time, and the way the book came about is, and it's a lot of things that I left out of it. It came from years of me just writing my personal journey and journaling, and I often kind of looked at the themes when I would do my journal writings. It was because something was lost, right? Like during that particular time. So whether it was a relationship, whether it was a transition and me just becoming an entrepreneur, all those different things. But I think the one that surprised me the most was me being able to be somewhat transparent in regards to my relationships. Oftentimes we don't talk about that, especially as men. We're not impacted by a loss of a relationship. And in my case, I've been divorced since 2017. So understanding who I am now versus who I was at that particular juncture in my life as being a husband and being a father, and what it would look like not being a husband but still being a father. And that process of grief of letting other people down and also letting myself down for not upholding that particular label, and then transitioning to further relationships after that. Me kind of like just getting to know myself all over again, and reliving that process. So I found a lot of comfort in just writing about my emotions, how I felt, what was my thoughts in those particular times. And I kind of translated it to the book because I know a lot of people and I see a lot of people, in sessions that are dealing with relational issues, intimacy issues, romanticism, all those different things. So being able to utilize that that lived experience, but also intertwining it with some clinical theories and modalities and things of that sort, it kind of helped me relate with the client and the client be able to relate with me in that particular fashion.
Okay. Okay. Well, that definitely shows that this is a very personal project for you and from your personal experience. And I know for myself, whenever I write something or pretty much anything I do, I go
Mhm.
pretty much hard to the paint. I put my all in it, my heart in it, and it's draining. So I know that can be draining for people. So for me, one of my takeaways was from the book, it really came from the continuation of your TEDx talk. The one
Mhm.
thing that stuck with me, and I put a clip on my reel today, was when you spoke about hearing the difference between different calibers of gunshots,
Yeah.
um, and that's not a flex. And
Right.
and when I heard you say that live, and when I've heard you say it as a couple of times that I've reviewed your talk, I said, man, I want to hear more of that. So when I dug into the book, it kind of revealed some of that behind uh, your process, kind of what you do as an outreach and how you reach people. So
hmm
and what do you hope readers will take away from the book when they do read a copy of it?
Um, going through that process myself, I felt relieved, right, to be able to verbalize and put out to the world, what my thoughts and my feelings were and the things that I've been able to experience in life. So, definitely relief, but also validation and permission, not necessarily to fix someone, because again, it's not a therapy session, but it's also uh, the book is also kind of like a self-discovery.
Yeah.
How can you find yourself within this particular story? And all of us have similar stories. It may be different, but it's still similar in the theme. We all have lost something, in life, and can kind of correlate and relate to these particular stories. And so being able to um, not necessarily fixed, like I said, but less, just to be alone and less crazy for, how we feel. I didn't want people to feel crazy, like, why am I still kind of carrying this particular emotion on? Why do I feel this way when this particular topic comes up? Or, something like that. So I wanted to make sure that the readers were able to kind of normalize, hey, this is a part of grief. And
Okay.
not only do we just have the stages of grief, but being able to work through those different stages and understand the emotions that are tied in each stage, being able to utilize that in real time and in real life, and allow them to say, oh, that makes sense. I want them to read and be like, oh, okay, that's what that is. Now that makes sense. It should hurt. You know what I mean? Like, so having that understanding alone can be incredibly healing. And again, it's personal. It's something that you do within yourself. I didn't want the book to just be a read and then you just put it down. But I wanted something that you can read it and then sit back and reflect on it, write about it, start your own journaling process, and then continue to move forward.
Okay. No, and I appreciate that. Again, as I said, it was a good continuation segue from your talk. Now, notice you also put out a workbook with the book. How can readers use that workbook in conjunction with the reflection questions in
Mhm.
the book itself to as a guide?
Right. What I say about that is, the book is kind of like the skeleton, You know, it gives it form, it gives it meaning, it gives you the things that you couldn't name. It allows you to identify it. The workbook is where you actually start to do the work. It's a collection of interventions. It's a collection of, you know, material that you can utilize on a day-to-day basis, whether that's going to spark, you know, a thought within you, whether it sparks an emotion, but it also sparks action behind that to where you actually have to do the work. Because once you read something that really hits you, and then you want to have those follow-up questions, or, well, you know, to try to figure out where it applies to me in my life, then you'll be able to find that within the workbook. It's not a thing to where you just marking off, checking boxes, things like that. You have room and the availability and the space to kind of sit with those emotions, sit with those thoughts, and write about it. It is more of a prompting type of workbook, more so than just, you know, we're just going from chapter 1 to chapter 8 and you're all done. It's something that you can continuously work on. It's a gift that keeps on giving, in a
Okay.
sense. So
Okay.
when you're going through things within life, which you're all going to do at some point in time, you can always go back and reflect. Okay, instead of asking, and I said this on the TEDx talk, you know, instead of asking, you know, why is this happening to me, or why am I feeling this way, you can just ask yourself, what did I lose in this situation? Now you're able to name it, and you're able to kind of process it a
Mhm.
little bit better once you're able to name what it is that you lost.
So one of the things is, and you kind of mentioned about recognizing, you know, grief moments and the different ways it is. But I think sometimes, you know, we think, well, that's a little thing, so I'm not even worried about that, and we
Hmm.
kind of brush that off. So what do you say to someone who thinks their loss is not big enough?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I'd probably say that pain doesn't require comparison for it to be
Mm,
valid, right? Just because something doesn't hurt you as much as it hurts me, it doesn't mean that your pain is less valid than mine and mine isn't more valid than yours. It's still pain. It's still a loss. So if it impacted you in any way, or if it altered you or required you to adapt, that's a
mhm.
loss. You know, whether you moving, you know, from a high rise to, you know, section 8 housing, it's still a loss of, you know, whatever you name it to be. So minimizing your grief doesn't make you stronger. And I think especially within my culture is, you know, where I grew up at, you know, the more that we can withstand, the stronger we are. You know, and that's the misconception that we have, that being strong is kind of like that label or that badge of honor. You know, whether it's the father, whether it's the grandmother, whether it's the mother, whether it's the child, being able to internalize emotions and then wonder why, as we get older, you know, we start to have physical health issues, emotional and mental health issues, all these things, because we are so used to internalizing and not really expressing it. So uh, it being quieter just don't it doesn't make you stronger. It just, you know, it has to give you the ability um to persevere, but also naming it allows you to actually become stronger. When you're able to name it, then that allows you to kind of remove it from you. I call it depersonalization, when you're able to remove a
Okay.
situation and look at it from a helicopter view or from a different perspective. Now you're able to move a little bit different, you know, and you don't need a tragedy in your life to deserve care. Something catastrophic don't necessarily need to happen in order for you to reach out to someone, get the support that you need to make it through anything that you experience in life.
Right. Sometimes we fall prey to death by a thousand cuts, right? You know, a bunch of little
Yeah.
things add up until they become one big albatross around our neck. Now,
Hmm.
one of the things, I'm gonna jump back a little bit. So you mentioned about the personal nature of you writing this book, and for the benefit of our attendees here, how did you overcome the vulnerabilities that you had to put out to put that out in paper, you know, in print? I mean, how'd you overcome that? How'd you deal with that?
Oh man, I think that's a collection of things. I think it came from me doing my own work. whether that be in therapy, whether that be naming those particular things. I think it came from being able to recognize that, hey, it's not just me. You know, I've always been a person of helping others. I'm an empath, so I feel other people. So being able to verbalize those things and indirectly be a teacher, right? Being a therapist of that sort, it allows me to be able to, one, role model
Hmm.
what's being, transparent, what it means to be vulnerable in these moments and actually exercise that as a strength. So once I'm able to get past the quote unquote the embarrassment or how people would look at me because I am telling my particular story, I
Right.
realized that everybody got a story,
Yeah.
and when you're able to tell that story and actually, process through it, you become stronger on the other side. So I encourage people to do that as well.
So, what was the most difficult thing for you? Was it designing the cover, doing the first chapter, or just deciding to do the project?
Oh man, the cover, I just woke up one day and said, this is what I'm gonna do, and just ran with it. I didn't give it much thought, but I knew that it would,
Mhm.
something as simple as cracks in a door, but you're walking through that door and there's light on the other side. It kind of
Okay.
resonated with me. So that was relatively easy. That wasn't difficult. I think for me, Barrett, I think the most uncomfortable part was actually starting it, to say that
Okay.
I'm actually going to make it a book, because like I said before, it was always a journal and something that I can just hold near and dear. If I was having a moment, whether I was remembering my parents or people that I've lost, whether it was, a new grief that popped in my life, I would just write it down. So I think the most difficult part was to actually put it in book form and say, you know what, I'm going to get this published. I'm going to put it out there, for others to read and for other people to digest. I think just that starting, okay, chapter one, and reflecting back to the night before our TED talk, and how I was feeling during those times. Was I nervous? Was I, looking forward to it? Was it a level of excitement? Was it, all those particular things like I expressed in the book? I wasn't nervous because I know I had experienced it. It was something that I lived, and it was constantly, within my mental. So being able to put it into book form, it was like it's one thing to talk about it on the stage, but then it's one
Yeah.
thing to have it published for any and everyone to kind of read and kind of digest and receive from me.
Yeah. Well, that internet's gonna last forever, so it's still gonna be for any and everyone. So
Yes, sir.
appreciate you sharing that. But you talked about grief and recognizing grief and going through that process. But what does healing look like once you've acknowledged that loss?
Oh man, there's a misconception that healing looks like, butterflies and rainbows and everything is just great,
Hmm.
you know. But for me, healing looks like the ability to acknowledge what's happening in real time, right? Oftentimes when we're going through things, we're feeling the emotion, but we have difficulty separating the emotion from the logic, right? What's actually happening versus how is it making me feel, right? So I think when it comes to healing, it allows you to recognize those things as, okay, this happened to me, that happened to me. Okay, so now what? What do I do with that? How do I process it, understand it and apply it within my life so I can become better? How does that, when I look at loss, right? I often tell people, even in session, I say, well, I don't experience necessarily loss per se, or back where I'm from, we call them L's. You take L's, right? And the only L's that I really truly experienced after experiencing losses was life learned experiences. So
Okay.
it's an experience. It's a lesson. What is this particular experience teaching me in this moment? Is it to be more patient? Is it to show
Mhm.
more discernment? Is it, perseverance?
Okay.
Whatever that lesson is, being able to apply it to my life. So the next time I do have a loss or any type of negative experience, I can apply it.
Okay, because it sounds like, your view and what you just said is it's a continuum. There's not a start and a stop, and now you're done.
Mhm.
You're gonna have to grab what you learn, and you're gonna have to use that later on,
Right.
and continue the process. So I appreciate that. So Damon, we're close to the end of our time, and we'll give you a chance to let the attendees know how they can get a copy of your book and how they can contact you for follow up. And
Sure.
we do have a question also from the
Uh-huh.
panelists. As life goes on after loss, let me get this right. This comes from if life goes on after loss, how did you deal with triggers?
How do you deal with the triggers? Understand that they're triggers. I often say that, healing, and like we was talking about before, what healing looks like. Healing doesn't look like, okay, I'm able to avoid the triggers. They're triggers for a reason. It's attached to a memory, it's attached to an experience. So when you are triggered, being able to recognize what's it telling you, what are your emotions telling you, what thoughts come to mind when that particular trigger happens, whether it's a smell, whether it's something that you see, something that you hear, something that you're feeling, utilizing those
Mhm.
five senses. So being able to understand that is always going to be a trigger. And the more I think the more times that you are triggered and the more times that you're able to incorporate something that helps mitigate the the frequency and the intensity of how long that will last, right? When we're talking about emotions, we all have emotions. We get happy, mad, sad, fearful, all those things in between. The only thing that makes it a diagnosis is how long it lasts, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you're not ever going to get depressed, because we all get depressed. Now, an actual diagnosis of depression,
Mhm.
that's because it happens over time and how
Yeah.
intense it is. So the more that you're able to recognize a trigger for being a trigger, then incorporating certain strategies and techniques that you can utilize that's helpful for you. And I tell my clients oftentimes, you have to personalize your own
Mhm.
treatment. I don't do cookie cutter, right? You should do
Okay.
this, you should do that. What works for you? And then we can apply it to your daily life to help mitigate some of those symptoms, help mitigate how impactful those triggers are.
Okay. And again, in the webinar meeting, you can link to Damon's TEDx talk under his bio and name, and you can also link to his LinkedIn if you want to find him and connect with him there. So go ahead and tell us briefly how we can get a copy of the book if they don't have one. Uh,
Yes. Absolutely, definitely. It's available on Amazon. Just type in my name and the title of the book, "A Loss is a Loss," and there you'll find the book and the workbook. And you can also go on my website. I'm still waiting on my orders because it sold out within the first 24 hours when I first put it on. So I'm waiting on some. I think the weather kind of delayed that a little bit. So,
okay.
but you can go on the website at the Couch Co llc.com. Again, that's the couch, COLLC.com. There you'll have all of my information, how you can contact me, other opportunities, whether that's the book, whether that's merchandise, whether that's even, asking questions in regards to treatment, and all those different things. So definitely go to the couch co llc.com.
Okay, great. Well, again, Damon, I appreciate you joining me tonight and all of the guests. Thank you all for chiming in. Again, congratulations on selling out your first wave of your book. I was able to cop my copy on Kindle since I travel a lot, so it gave me a chance to jump right in soon as it was released
So I
right off the
appreciate
press.
you.
So, again, thank you all for joining Between the Pages, a monthly webinar series. Hopefully, you'll join us for future series as we have this on the fourth Monday of every month, except for December, because it's a break time, and and we will put out a copy of this that you'll see for replay that you'll be able to share. You also will receive a evaluation and tomorrow or the day after. We ask you to please give us some feedback so we can continue to improve this platform. And again, we thank you all for joining us tonight. And Damion, thank you for joining to be a guest. And may you all
Absolutely.
have a very safe evening, especially with the weather wherever you are. And stay blessed and not stressed. Thank you again.
All right.
Good night.